Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're going to unpack the massive, sweeping history of the world, but we're doing it through a really specific, totally fascinating lens. We're going to look at the alphabet behind ancient combs. Seriously, we're tracing how humans communicate, how those ideas spread, and how they ultimately build and sometimes destroy entire civilizations.
So you might be asking yourself a question that sounds a bit like a joke. What on earth does a 3,500-year-old lice comb have to do with the rise and fall of global empires? Well, it turns out, kind of everything. We're going to trace a straight line from the very first cities right through to an ancient comb carrying the first alphabet and see how that one simple invention changed the game, leading us directly into our modern, hyper-connected world.
Section 1. First cities. First writing. The dawn of civilization in Iraq.
Thousands of years ago, right between two rivers in Iraq, the Sumerians invented writing to figure out how the world worked. These are the folks who originally divided our days into hours, minutes, and seconds. But early communication was incredibly complicated. People were using thousands of pictures or mysterious scripts to communicate. Take the Indus River Valley script, for example. It still carries $1 million prize if you can actually decipher it. Contrast that complexity with early conquerors like Hammurabi. He realized that carving his laws into a giant rock was a fantastic way to solidify his power, secure his possessions, and build the very first empires.
Section 2. The Alphabet Breakthrough. Phoenicians, Canaanites, and a tiny comb.
While those early conquerors relied on brute force and really complex symbols, the seafaring Phoenicians created a totally new paradigm. They shifted from drawing pictures to recording the actual sounds coming out of human mouths. Let's walk through this brilliant phonetic logic. Step 1, they took their word for ox, which was alep, and just isolated the first sound, ah. Step 2, they took their word for house, which was bet, and isolated the buzz sound. Step 3, put those purely phonetic sounds together, ah and ba, and you get ob, their word for father. They literally cracked the code. You didn't need thousands of pictures anymore, you just needed a handful of symbols to represent sounds.
Now, this idea was so revolutionary that when the Greeks saw it, they thought it was absolute genius. They adopted it and, well, they give us the word we still use today, alphabet. It's directly derived from those first two Phoenician words, alib and bet. It was such an efficient, brilliant way to communicate that the idea basically spread like wildfire, and everyone started copying it.
And what's absolutely wild is the physical evidence we have for this. We know the Canaanites started using this phonetic system over 3,500 years ago. Why? Because archaeologists found the earliest known use of this alphabet inscribed on, of all things, an ancient lice comb. Literally, a mundane item of personal hygiene ended up setting the foundation for global communication.
Section 3. Empires spread the word, conquering the world with ideas.
Let's zoom out from that tiny comb for a second. Over in the ancient Middle East, there was this rapid-fire succession of violent conquests. Before 500 BC, the Assyrians conquer almost everyone. Then shortly after, the Babylonians rise up and conquer the Assyrians. By around 539 BC, Cyrus the Great and the Persians conquer the Babylonians, the Medes, and the Lydians. Now, as these massive empires violently rose and fell and expanded their borders, they inadvertently acted as these massive superhighways, carrying new written languages and ideas across the known world.
But you see, it wasn't just physical borders expanding, it was human thought itself. This built into a massive ideological revolution. In the area the Greeks called Indike, Siddhartha Gautama saw suffering, became a monk, and established Buddhism, which later emperors actually spread specifically to try and stop people from killing each other. Over in China, Confucius and Laozi brought complex new philosophies focusing on societal order and harmony. In the West, Greek philosophy cascaded down this incredible chain of written thought. Socrates taught Plato, who taught Aristotle, who in turn taught Alexander the Great, who used those very ideals to fuel his conquest of the world. Later on, Muhammad would unite the warring Arab clans under Islam through recorded revelations, so organized recorded thought was conquering humanity right alongside ancient armies.
And these recorded ideas? They were incredibly durable. They built massive ideological anchors. For instance, the Franks and the Pope formed the Holy Roman Empire, a political and religious structure heavily dependent on written doctrine, which would last for an absolutely incredible 1,000 years.
Section 4. Paper, print, and protests. The printing revolution.
As sprawling empires like the Mongols violently expanded and the Black Death wiped out a staggering third of Europe's population, humanity was ripe for a new communication technology. In the center of this innovation was often in the East. The Chinese had long ago invented paper and early forms of printing. Actually, fun side note,
They were also the first to use toilet paper, while the Romans were still using sponges on sticks and the Greeks were using broken clay pots. But while China had paper first, Europe was about to experience its own massive communication renaissance thanks to the invention of movable type. So when Johannes Gutenberg perfects the printing press with movable type, the immediate question is, what do we do with it? The answer was completely obvious to him. What should we print? Bibles! He decides to mass-produce the most important text of his culture. But bringing mass communication to the masses immediately ran into some huge roadblocks.
Yeah, Gutenberg hit a massive ideological wall. When he wanted to print Bibles, King Ferdinand essentially laid down the law. Don't print them in Spanish, because we're having an inquisition. The authorities were absolutely terrified. They were busy checking to see if Jewish Catholics were secretly keeping the Sabbath and burning heretics. The rapid, uncontrolled spread of printed information was on a direct collision course with rulers trying to tightly control the religious beliefs of their subjects.
The crucial takeaway here is that the printing press completely fractured Europe. Information was now decentralized. A German priest named Martin Luther used the press to become arguably the world's first mass media influencer, protesting the Catholic Church and sparking the Reformation. King Henry VIII used this religious fracturing to completely break England away from the Pope, basically just so he could divorce his wives. The ideological split was so deep that when Pope Gregory mathematically fixed the calendar, Protestants literally refused to use it because they viewed the Pope as the Antichrist. All these massive religious and political disputes, fueled by printed communication, eventually drove competing European powers to look outward, rushing to explore and colonize the Americas.
Section 5. The Modern Connected World. Revolutions and Global Networks.
We were entering a hyper-connected era where ideas, printed on paper and traveling in the hulls of ships across vast oceans, would dictate the fate of entire nations. Information about freedom and taxation sparked a literal domino effect of revolutions around the globe. Think about it. Step 1, the British taxed the Americans to pay for a war, causing the American Revolution. Step 2, the French go into massive debt, helping the Americans, which leads them to tax their own people, causing the French Revolution. Step 3, the chaos in France allows Napoleon to seize power and briefly conquer Europe. And Step 4, seeing all of this, Simon Bolivar leads a wave of successful revolutions across Latin America. Meanwhile, back in Britain, instead of a political revolution, they pivot to an industrial one, using steam power to manufacture goods faster and build a second, even larger global empire.
But we have to remember that ideas traveling globally are incredibly powerful and sometimes devastatingly deadly. When Christian missionaries brought their printed text and ideas into China, a local man read them, had a dream, and convinced himself that he was the brother of Jesus Christ. He led the Taiping Rebellion, a massive conflict fueled by this imported ideology, which left a staggering 30 million people dead. 30 million.
Meanwhile, other sprawling empires were using communication, strategic marriages, and religion to grow to unprecedented sizes. Just look at Russia's expansion. In the Middle Ages, Vikings settle in Kiev, marry the local Slavs, and convert to Christianity. By the 1400s, when the Ottomans conquer the Byzantines, Moscow positions itself as the Third Rome, the new center of true Christianity. By the 1500s, Ivan the Terrible claims the title of Caesar, or Tsar, and Russia expands massively across Asia, eventually even discovering Antarctica in 1820. The world stage was being perfectly set for modern global collisions.
And those collisions came rapidly as European powers industrialized Europeans entirely ignored centuries of highly developed existing African empires, like Egypt, Kush, Mali, and the Zulus. Instead, European scientists applied deeply flawed Darwinian evolutionary concepts, essentially arguing that Europeans were biologically meant to rule to justify a brutal land grab. This sparked the scramble for Africa. Italians invaded, Belgians butchered in the Congo, Germans set up military bases, and Britain expanded to become the largest empire in human history. They were all rushing down a path of imperial competition that would eventually lead straight into the world wars.
Eventually, as the old ancient empires, like the Ottomans, finally crumbled and faded away, they left a massive void. But it wasn't just filled by new nations. It was filled by crazy, world-shrinking new technologies. Telegraphs, telephones, airships, submarines, and eventually the digital code of modern websites. The way we communicated went from a lice comb to instant global digital transmission.
Which leaves us with this final, highly provocative thought to take away. We've seen how writing changed absolutely everything. If the simple phonetic letters scratched onto a tiny Canaanite lice comb were enough to spark thousands of years of philosophy, bloody revolutions, and massive empire building, what exactly will our modern web of instant digital communication build next?
Or, perhaps more frighteningly, what will it destroy? Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and keep questioning the history around you.